All right, everyone, we're here with Giancarlo Bodoni, legendary ADCC champ 2 times, and a great friend of mine. Thanks for being here. So we're here at Sheepdog Response Gracie Umaita in Austin, and I just went through a class with Giancarlo, and he went through a Kipping escape version that is just so useful to have in your arsenal. Kipping is tough, we were talking about this. So we have some videos on kipping on the channel, but what do you think it is that makes kipping like a particularly, it's not a tough skill, and we were talking about this, it's not that it's complicated.
It's hard to pick up, but once you get it, I think it's gonna be one of the escapes that you use the most, one of the techniques that you use the most. It's certainly one of the ones that I use the most. But the initial movement is a little bit awkward and different for a lot of people, so it's kind of hard to pick up in the beginning. But once that motion kind of clicks for people, I feel like it's easy for them to replicate it. And then it just comes down to different variations in different situations where you're going to use it. So like we did mounted kips, but there's other situations where you might use kipping escapes, in particular for escaping from bottom pins.
So there are a lot of things, I think there are a lot of skills that you can develop in jiu-jitsu that are foundational, fundamental, bridging, shrimping, these sorts of things. Kipping is not often included in that, but in many ways we were saying like it really should be. It's there is a feel to it, and I think sometimes what people struggle with is that it's when you're learning how to kip, you're often working with someone and the resistance is not exactly right, or kind of where their body is not exactly right. So before we go into the kip variation that we're going to look at, can we talk a little bit about what you want your partner to be doing? Like kind of what's a good feedback from the top person?
Yeah.
Because you don't want someone timing for kipping. You're not going to have someone sitting here, with a wide base and wide knees, right?
So like if you're on bottom, one of the biggest things is that when you're doing the escape, typically, let's say for example, Brian was just going to do like a regular knee elbow escape, right? One of the most common things you see is that when you're drilling passively, the top person is just so passive that the move works, but it's just so unrealistic. So that when you try to apply it against resistance, it just doesn't. It never feels smooth, and you never actually really get to hit it, and you end up being inefficient with the move and using a lot more energy than you need to get it done. So something like this typically happens where like if he goes to hit a knee elbow escape, like your training partner just kind of does this and they just let their legs go super wide, and that's fine because he hits the knee elbow escape, but you don't really get a realistic sense of it. So like for the kipping escape, for example, what we want to do is we want to have you want your training partner to essentially try to emulate what it's going to be like when you're sparring, the resistance you're going to feel when you're sparring without trying to stop you from doing the move, if that makes sense.
Which is pretty good advice all around.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not, to interrupt real quick, like, a lot of times there's this like dichotomy between like the person doing nothing and the person going as hard as they can, but you do want to find like this middle ground where they're not going so hard they're stopping the move, but they are providing you with resistance that makes sense for the context of the move, because the more advanced techniques require proper reactions and proper responses, and if your partner's not giving you that or they're giving you something else, you kind of are learning under false pretenses, which is never a good thing.
Yeah. So if I know he's going to do a move, it's going to be relatively easy for me to stop it. I won't always be able to stop it, but I'll make it really hard for him to be able to complete it. So even though I know that he's going to do the move, I don't want to stop it, but I want to give him the appropriate amount of resistance. And then, obviously depending on whatever move it is that you're drilling, as you start to understand the move and get better and better at it, you can increase or decrease and vary that resistance, maybe with not necessarily with physical tension, but with different reactions, right? So with the kip, it's kind of no different. So like if he's on top of me, what I want to try to avoid is a situation where every time somebody goes to do a kip for the first time, let's say for example his ankles are crossed initially, a lot of times what will happen is the second that I go to bridge my partner, his legs just go super wide and he like posts the leg, right? So he just kind of like does this. And when you're sparring, this almost never happens, right? When you're sparring and I go to bridge Brian, he's gonna try to keep his ankles crossed and make his knees really tight. And when I go to So if I was drilling it that way, and then I go to try to hit it in sparring, and then his knees don't come apart. I just feel like it never works, and you end up kind of in this awkward situation. So your partner has to give you some resistance. I would say start off at like maybe whatever your 20 or 30% resistance is, insofar as he's got crossed ankles and he's trying to keep them crossed, and he's giving you a slight back heel. And he's also trying to keep his knees, in this case, he's trying to keep his knees wide, right? But he doesn't want them to go so wide that his feet come apart. Yeah, exactly. It's going to be easy for me to isolate.
Just come around this way, you can see a little bit of what's going on. So when we're practicing kipping initially, okay, you can do it with open feet, but as Giancarlo was saying, like you want to cross the feet, and you don't, you're not pinching your knees, but you're not kind of like just letting your feet be out too wide. So I'm going to pull my heels back, cross my ankles, and then have my knees resting.
Yeah. And him giving me the appropriate reaction and the right amount of resistance is gonna force me to hit the move with proper technique, right? Because if I don't do it with proper technique, I'm not gonna be able to. There's a reason why he would want to mount me in such a way. It's because it's gonna give him the most stability and the most control. So I need the right positioning from him so that I can practice the proper technique to be able to break that control. Okay. So first thing we'll talk about is just kind of how we're going to frame in this situation. Typically, we have two basic ways of framing, in particular for kips, and that's with posting on the hip. So you can get your hands on your training partner's hip, and you use the not just so much the palm of your hand, but more like the heel of the hand right there in your training partner's hip bone. Okay, and when we do this, we want to have closed elbows. So I want my elbows to be tucked in close to my rib cage and inside of my training partner's knees here. Okay, so this is one good way for us to do it. The other good way, and this is typically what I prefer doing, I do use the hip post as well, but is going to be a cross hip post where we go across the hip. Okay, now the one thing with, we'll talk about two kind of common mistakes from each of these. Okay, the most common mistake with the first one, right, where we go double hip post, is that your training part is that you put your elbows really wide, and your partner can start looking to take an underhook and elevate your arm. Okay, so we want to avoid this. So when we go in and we get that hip post, what I typically recommend is if you can't get your elbows in tight right away, just give a little bit of a bump just to be able to get your elbows inside. Okay, I want to close this gap off so he doesn't have room to dig that underhook. Okay, so I would say that would be one of the more common mistakes with this double hip post. As long as you have a good structure, okay, with this hip post where you're on the heel of the hand as opposed to the fingers or the palms where you could damage your wrist here, go to the heel of the hand so that you have the strongest structure to support your training partner's weight. Okay, you also don't want to like overly push with these frames, right? So the frame is intended to maintain distance between me and my partner, but I'm not going to use it to push him off of me even when I'm kipping. There's going to be a little bit of tension, right? But I'm not trying to get full extension out of my arms.
I'm gonna and this is true for frames of all sorts. Like wherever you're framing from side control, you're framing from half guard, you're doing a cross shoulder pose. It's not that you're pushing the guy back or the girl back away from you. It's more like you have a static position that's maintaining the distance that they're at. Okay, and then when you start moving off of that, then that space can widen. But it is a big, especially beginners, like make this mistake trying to push. Sometimes with posts you do that, but frames is never like that. Yeah. You know, frames is always about just maintaining that distance, so that it's impossible for me, in this case, like it's impossible for me to close this gap. Like I can lean my weight on it, but he's not pushing me back. He's just kind of maintaining this open structure, and that's the spot his knees are going to go into.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's exactly it. Like you don't need to. If I'm pushing, that's just going to be an inefficient motion. So what's going to allow me to this is going to maintain space, but what's going to allow me to create more space is the use of my legs and my hips, right? My off balances, my shrimps, my kip, and that sort of thing. So the frame is intended to maintain the distance, and then we use our hips and our legs and et cetera, depending on the situation we're in, to create more space, right? So with the cross hip post, one of the most common mistakes I see people make is that they overcommit a lot of times. Usually when we have a cross hip post, there was going to be some degree of turning involved. And a lot of times what happens is a lot of people will overcommit this, and their elbow will start to clear their partner's center line, and then their back gets exposed. Okay, so this is what we want to avoid from this situation. And again, the cross hip post, right? We want this almost 90-degree frame here, that's what's gonna give us the best structure. We don't wanna push. So if he's in close to me, I see a lot of times what happens is people start to push, and a lot of times their arms will slide up, okay? And then they'll kind of end up with this extended position. They might get their back exposed, etc. So the frames have to be on the belt line, essentially, right there in your training partner's hip. And they're not intended to push. They're just intended to create a strong structure and maintain distance. So regardless of which one you choose, whether you choose to go with a cross hip post and then reinforce the frame with an inside elbow, this hand here, again, we don't want that wide elbow position. We want a tight elbow position. Or you choose to go double hip post, same thing, right? We want to have our elbows in nice and tight. Regardless of the frame that we use, I'll just take a cross hip post for now. Your partner will typically go in and he'll start looking to hug your head. So let's say, for example, he has a left-handed cross face here, okay? If I choose to use a hip post, I have to use the frame, or a cross hip post rather, I have to use the frame on the same side that he's cross facing me, okay? So I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna insert it like this, because of the direction that I'm gonna go to bridge is gonna be in this direction. So when Brian talked about, these motions, right? Like bridging, shrimping, and kipping, right? These are kind of your fundamental motions for mount escapes and pin escapes. And kipping is the one that's lesser talked about because it's one of the harder ones to master, the one that I think a lot of people have the most trouble with, but it is going to be one of the most useful. Typically, the bridge, when you learn to escape mount, right, in jiu-jitsu class, the first mount escape you learn is usually a trap and roll, right, which is a variation of bridging escape. But as you go against better and better opponents, the bridge is less used for actually escaping, and it's more used for initiating the escape to create an off balance. So what I want to do is I want to take his mount and I want to make it unstable. So as he has a cross face in place, okay, he has his two knees on the floor, he's got his ankles crossed, he's in good position, etc., etc. I go in and I insert any one of the frames that we talked about, and when I go in, if I tried to hit a knee elbow escape or a kipping escape from here, it's just never going to work, right? I'm never going to be able to kip. So I have to create instability. The way that I do that is through the bridge. All right. So how I get the most out of my bridge is by bringing my I bring my heels in close to my butt, and then I like to bridge off the balls of my feet. I'm going to point my knee in the direction that I want to bridge. The reason why I'm choosing this direction is because of his cross face, right? If he has good cross face pressure, he's going to be using that to control the direction of my head. So if I tried to bridge to my right from here, it's just going to have no effect, okay, because of the cross face. So I have to bridge with it. So from here, what we're going to do is, as he goes to put that cross face in, I'm going to get a nice bridge that's going to put my training partner onto one knee. Once he's on one knee, now is when he's unstable. So I've created that initial off balance, and then now from here I have to contract my body and round out my back and shoulders into this position here, okay? So I have the reinforced frame, okay, across my training partner's hips. I've created the instability by putting all of his weight onto one knee. That's a prerequisite for this kipping escape. And then now from here, we're in this position. Now is where the tricky part comes into place. A lot of people can get this part kind of easy, but the kip is usually where people start to struggle. So what I want to do is let's say he's off the mount. What I want to do with the kip, okay, you kind of break a little bit of a rule in jiu-jitsu with the kip, which is where typically we want to have our training partner between our knees, okay, and our knees open. With a kip, we close our knees and we have our knees pointed off to one side, okay? So when we get into this position, I want to maintain this position, and I always like to keep my feet touching each other when I go into the kip. So I try to always keep my feet connected, not crossed, but I keep them connected. And what I want to do is, because a lot of times what happens is people end up flailing their legs. So I use that connection to the feet almost just like a feedback that I know that my legs are in good position. My knee's going to be in line with my training partner's tailbone, and we're just going to keep this rounded body position, keep the tension running through the frames, and then we just pump our legs until I can get my knee to come and slip on the inside. So what it'll look like is this. We come out, we get into good position, I hit that good initial bridge, and I round out my body. And then now from here, we just pump, and we bring our knees in. If you notice, my frames didn't change shape, right? So they're in the same positioning here. I use the kipping motion of my legs and my hips to create the distance, right? The frame just reinforced and maintained his hips away from mine. And then now from here, you can start looking to bring your legs back in, okay, and start to put your training partner back into going. Okay, so that's essentially like the basic premise of that kipping escape.
So one thing that he was doing, which you probably you'll see here is, but you really feel it when the person's doing it, is there's always a connection between, once you start this kipping action, there's always a connection between your legs and your partner's legs and hips. The legs are never disconnected. So again, you saw it here, but he went to go hit the bridge, and then from here, when he contracted, when you do this move, you have to fold your body in half so that your knees come in and you get this kind of connection. There's a lot of tension pulling on the knee, like your knees pulling into your partner's hamstring here. So that the legs are not slack, because if I start trying to pump my legs here, I don't have a good connection to like join the action of the flutter with his leg. Here, when the legs are connected, you get that solid pump, and then you're able to actually move your partner. I think this is another big thing. It's like you did it it was just very fluid, but like I think a lot of times people are learning this. It's like the legs are disconnected from the hips, and we can't have that. Okay, so that's my 2 cents. But you have to have this kind of these combination of qualities. You have to have someone who's on top, who knows what they're supposed to be doing, right? Their grips, the connection. You have to be able to use an off balance of some sort to get the person into the right position to start moving. And then your mechanics have to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a checklist. Now, when you were teaching the class, you showed a variation where it's not possible to get that whole frame. So
Yes.
this is kind of like that.
Yeah. So when obviously that's your basic application, right? Your kind of day one kip is you put them on a knee and then you go through the motion of the kip. And once that kip starts to feel natural, that motion of kipping, and you feel that you can easily, against obviously a compliant training partner, bring your knees inside. Now you have to start adding different variables, right? Different varying degrees of resistance. Sometimes that resistance comes from physical tension. Sometimes it comes from a situation where he does something a little bit different.
Like a different scenario.
Exactly. So we can go into 2 very common ones. One is a situation where your training partner fights your initial bridge, and the second one is a situation where he isolates an arm. Okay, and we're going to have to use a similar motion in both, right? There's sort of a similar element, right, which is the element of misdirection. So if our training partner is mounted on top of us, and let's say, for example, he has a cross face and he has a good post out wide, okay? So from here, if I want to go in and I want to start looking to off balance Brian in this direction, which is obviously the direction that I need to off balance him because he has a cross face in place, because of this post, and because of, it's not just the post, but the fact that as you go against a more skilled opponent, they can start to anticipate what you want to do, right? So if he understands that in order for me to escape the mount, I have to off balance him and put him on one knee, he's going to just anticipate that bridge, and he's going to make it hard for me to bridge. So when I go to bridge, just the anticipation of it makes it hard for me to get a good bridge out of it, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to start adding misdirection into this. So what I can do is I can hit a small bridge in this direction, okay, just to get him to resist me. The moment that I resist, and ultimately what I want is I want to off balance him in this direction. So I'll hit a small bridge in this direction. That gives me a little bit of tension. Now I hit a slightly bigger bridge in the opposite direction to get him to overcorrect. So I go 1, 2. Okay, you can see that that's starting to create some instability. Now he realizes, okay, I'm starting to lose this mounted position. Let me overcorrect. You notice the knee came up just slightly. It's not enough for me to kip, but it just came up slightly off the ground. So he's thinking, okay, let me overcorrect and drive that knee to the floor, and then I can hit an even bigger bridge out in this direction, and then from there I'm in good position. Like he mentioned, we want that connection, okay, of our thighs to our training partner's thighs, our hips to his hips, etc. Okay, and then now from here I've created a good off balance. I can start to flutter my legs, okay, and get those knees, okay, to come inside. We can hit a similar misdirection if he has an underhook. So the underhook is particularly problematic because not only does it make it hard for me to bridge him, but it's also, I'm starting to get in danger here. So a lot of times what I like to do with the underhook, and this is different from person to person, but I like to connect my arm, especially if his head's in tight. I like to connect my arm to my training partner's neck, right? Like my bicep to his neck and his ear here. Because he ultimately wants to walk the arm up and bring it to the opposite side. So I like to make this connection here. And even if your training partner's head is down, a lot of times it'll be posted like this, and that forehead on the mat makes him even more stable. Okay, so what we're going to do under these circumstances, either with a cross frame or a regular hip post, we're going to hit that same misdirection. I like to utilize this arm to move his head, so I guide the head as I bridge. So I'll hit this bridge where I go little bump 1, little bump 2, a slightly bigger bump rather, I should say, and then one big bridge in the opposite direction as he goes to overcorrect, like this. Okay, a lot of times that'll give me the opportunity to bring the arm inside, but even if it doesn't, right, even if it just puts him on a knee, I can hit that one-handed kip that brings, my knees to the inside. So one more time. We come out, and he can go and he can start adding a little bit more tension this time, right? So we just come out 1, 2, 3, and then from there, the misdirection is what allows me to deal with that, again, that varying degree of resistance.
We're always working to put, dilemma-based attacks and dilemma-based defenses is like a hallmark of our kind of school of jiu-jitsu, like we're all taught. Danaher is always very insistent on there being a dilemma, choice between two bad choices to make. And this is a good example from the bottom person's perspective. You're creating a condition where the top person has to make a choice between maintaining the mount, like kind of staying tight, maintaining that post on the floor, or defending the off balance. So you end up in a situation when you're on the top where, even without thinking about it, you're not always making a conscious choice. You're having to make these little tiny adjustments. And when you do that, it's these small slivers of space that open up. And obviously the more you do it, the better you get, and the smaller space you need. But with, after a little bit of time, you're going to find that even if you only get like a little bit of breathing room, it's enough to be able to create the sort of off balance that you need in order to be able to hit a good kip.
And I think that the bridging, so a lot of people, they associate like off balances or Kazushi with offensive situations, either standing position or guard position. But it's equally as important in defensive situations where you're caught underneath somebody in mount, for example. And so when you think about off balancing and you want to start, because the bridge is kind of the prerequisite to these escapes, that off balance, like if you want to become a master of off balancing, which if you want to master jiu-jitsu in all of its forms, you do have to learn to that's the prerequisite of not just the escape, it's a prerequisite of a lot of offensive movements, right? Is creating that Kazushi. The more Kazushis you stack on each other, the more they start to amplify, right? So
it's like a compounding effect.
Correct, yeah. So the first ones are going to be very small. And so I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of people will make is that they go into that first bridge and they just go 100% into that bridge, and it just fails and they use a lot of energy. Now all of a sudden your training partner is wary of the bridge, and it's going to make the whole escape process a lot longer. Whereas if you can learn to relax in these situations, just give those little bumps and twitches and just stack them on each other, you get that effect to where each one is greater than the other until ultimately you get one that's big enough, even if it's not huge, it's big enough that you can slip a knee inside, slip an elbow inside, and then go in and recover.
Fakes and feints work the same way standing, in other martial arts. You have boxing, you have Muay Thai. It's very rare to see someone come out and throw a jab and a cross, jab, cross, hook, even though that is a foundational technique in striking art. It's like there are only so many punches you can throw,
right?
But when you watch people who are experts at that, there's so much faking, so much feinting, so many kind of little failed efforts that get someone thinking of moving in a certain direction that it obscures the actual intention. And I think that this is a good example of that in jiu-jitsu. We don't have obviously like fakes and feints where we're kicking and punching, but we do have fakes and feints where it's unclear exactly what your true intention is. And so the bridge really functions as a way to kind of get people out of balance and then thinking something different than what you're actually going to be doing. You know, ultimately we're all trying to be ninjas. And so, you know, the more mind tricks that you can have in your arsenal, the better it's going to be. All right, this was awesome. And so, you know, hopefully this was helpful. You got an in-depth look at kind of how, you know, how someone who really is a master of this technique can kind of like break it down, but also how the components of the technique, it's like they're not complicated. You know, they're not always easy. You do have to practice. It's a fundamental skill, but over time you get better at it. And then as a result, you have a really robust defense that's not just based on, you know, flailing, bridging as hard as you can, freaking out, or having like a terrible training partner who doesn't know what they're doing, and so you feel great.
Yeah. This isn't like an overnight move. Like you don't just learn this in one day. This is one that takes a little bit of time. It's like learning to walk for the first time. Like once you figure it out, you never forget it. But so if it fails the first couple times and you're struggling for, you know, a few days or a week or whatever the case is, just keep at it, because it is one of those motions that's hard to get, but once it clicks, this is going to be the escape that you use probably the most from mounted position, and then there's variations of it from other situations as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, so down below we'll put some links for Giancarlo's videos, a lot of great BJJ fanatics videos. We'll put some links down there. He's got a lot of tournaments and upcoming events for the rest of the year. If you're watching this after that, I'm sure there's some other great stuff going on. And there's some other stuff down below. You leave a comment, let us know if you have any questions. Hopefully this stuff was helpful for you. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much for checking out this video. There are going to be some links down below to my BJJ Fanatics videos, some other stuff for you to check out. If you watch this video all the way through and you're not subscribed yet, this video is recommended to you because YouTube is very smart. It knows what you like, and hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you subscribe, then you'll be able to get more access to these videos, and I'll see you at the next one.